Hey guys, today's story is about a rather rude player. So, I found the RPG horror story subreddit a bit ago, and I didn't really have a horror story beyond what I saw mostly on here already. DMs dropping out last minute, too many players, that guy players, and etc. Most of those situations happened years ago when I first started getting into 5e, and it didn't take me long after to find a steady group that I'm happy to call some of my closest friends. So I thought I had enough experience to know what to do when in those iffy situations. But then I decided to run a one-shot for my boyfriend's friend group, and the people involved are as follows. Harry, my boyfriend, relatively new to D&D. Jared, the problem player, also new to D&D. I had DM'd before with my own group, and it was a blast, despite me being a first-time DM, nerves, and all of that. So, during a dry spell with the aforementioned group, I asked Harry if his friends would want to try a one-shot, and he said, yeah. So we went about making a Discord server and getting everyone invited. When we had a group gathered with all but Jared, I had felt bad for him as he had recently moved away to a wildly different time zone, and didn't really get to play or hang out with a group as is. Missing what would end up being 3 sessions with his friends felt like too much time to not try to rope him in, at least. And this was my first mistake, out of many. The group ended up being 5 people in total. Session 0 came, and I got everyone set up on Roll20 with their characters. I had asked everyone beforehand to think about class and race, as I had wanted to spend the majority of Session 0 explaining D&D fundamentals, and all that jazz. Jared missed the memo, I guess, because he came into Session 0, asked what one of the others were playing, and immediately picked the exact race, class, and subclass as them. The only nominal difference being the name, which was just a poorly hidden and lackluster innuendo that doesn't even warrant repeating. This wasn't a serious one-shot, and I love play on words, but this was just horribly done and not even in a good way. So I was a little annoyed, but honestly had my hands full with getting everyone else set up that I just ended up asking him later to change his character. The class he had chosen was rather difficult to play for a new player, or else I wouldn't have asked. Now, the first red flag was towards the end of said session, as I had them go through a practice scenario in an inn, so I could see how they vibe with each other and how they would like my DM style. I described them entering, and a dwarf barkeeper sleeping behind the bar, a notice board, and some patrons gambling and the like. Immediately after, Jared pipes up and asks how the dwarf is sleeping. I took this as a really good sign, so I happily began to describe the dwarf in more detail. But before I could even get more than a couple of words out, he immediately states having sex with the sleeping dwarf. I deflate and started reeling from what he said. I was actually dumbfounded because nothing in his personality told me that he was this type of dude. But nonetheless, Harry and his friends rightly chastise him, as I was still in a bit of shock, and we continued on. The session ended, leaving me a bit sad and regretful, but I figured that he didn't continue on, and everyone else seemed like they were okay to go on. So I'll just hammer in next session the type of one-shot this is not. So, you as the DM need to call this crap out, especially during a session 0 like this was. If you don't want them making stupid little comments, or jokes, or any of the other crap that those guys have done during any of the stories that I've read, then you need to call them out and talk to them about it. You don't need to make a public spectacle during the middle of a game, but you definitely need to talk to them, and if they don't stop, probably get rid of them. Especially if the other players are chastising them for making these jokes, because in this circumstance, you're not the only person that doesn't want it there. So, session 1 came. I did the hammering, and there was no outcries, so we started the one-shot. Everything goes well, and everyone but Jared is role-playing awkwardly, including yours truly, and I make many mistakes, but we were doing good until the first combat started. Every time it was his turn, Jared would ask Harry what he should attack. I had tried to address him by describing what he saw, but then he would cut me off just to inquire to Harry again, and eventually Harry would point one monster out. Now I was more annoyed, but I chalked it up to not being comfortable with me, as before this, he did have some trouble actually directly talking to me in voice chat when we would all play games. I find it odd, as I've known him for more than 3 years, but honestly, I could work with it. So, the session ended okay, and I worked on improving my DMing during the interlude, and we actually got through the next session pretty well. Jared still wouldn't talk to me directly, and I kept trying to get him to interact with the party, to no avail. The party interacted with a goblin NPC who they affectionately called Knock. And it was at this point that Jared began adding in quiet, helpful anecdotes like, "What the hell is happening? Oh, this is so dumb. Why are you doing this?" And so on. For context, at this point, the only ridiculous thing that happened was that the goblin led the party to the hideout of the goblins, and had taught them how to do the, Noki Pokey? To open a magical door, essentially. It's silly, but it was supposed to be in good fun. The session continued, and the comments kept flowing. But when combat happened, he stopped, and I was relieved. So as nicely as I can put this, if you have people making these types of underhanded comments, tell them to shut the hell up and leave if they don't like it. This is actually something I've dealt more with as a player than as a DM. But that hasn't stopped me from telling them to stuff it, because I don't want to hear their rude and snide comments when I'm otherwise having a decent time playing the game. And usually the same can be said for the other players. Nobody wants to hear you being a miserable prick. If you're not having fun in a campaign, do everyone else the favor and see yourself out. So the session ended, and I was contemplating what to do. At this point, it would only be one more session to conclude the one-shot, so I decided I could handle it. One of the many mistakes that I made was that I didn't honestly contemplate how it would affect my DMing, and how it was affecting my players. I was naive enough to think that he would stop at comments, and that his comments were only affecting me. When the last session began, Jared began interrupting the recap that I was doing. It took 5 full tries to get a sentence out, as he kept wanting to go on a rant about a very different topic than D&D. So tell him to shut the hell up. You're there to play a game. Even without having D&D associated with this, having someone interrupt you 5 times in a row is rather infuriating. Honestly, one of the things you could probably do in this circumstance, at the very least if it's an online one, you could either move him out of the room, if it's Discord or something similar, or just mute him. But that's just a band-aid solution. That's not fixing the issue. That is that guy. But I finished the recap and we moved on. It began with a lot of promise and a lot of laughs from everyone but Jared, who is still making the same comments. And to be clear, my mental health on this particular day was not really at the top of the bar, but I didn't feel bad enough to cancel the session. Again, trying to tough it out. So the comments weren't helping, but we were mostly ignoring him, so we kept going. Eventually, the party reached the last and final place that had the big bad in it, and the comments came louder and louder, and by the midpoint, I was feeling drained, so I called a break. And when we came back, it took me multiple attempts to resume as Jared kept interrupting to steer into whatever rant he had cooking. Again, by this point you should have dealt with the issue. If someone wants to keep derailing your frickin' campaign, then get rid of him. And when he was called out on it, he stated in the most whiny tone that he would rather be talking about insert topic here than playing another second of this stupid game. He's literally asking you to kick him. Why are you not kicking him? The wave of misery that hit me was insurmountable. I was just done at that point. I was never good at confrontation, and I'm still not, so I just let it go. Dumb, I know. I continued the game, and it had some cool moments, but I ended up fumbling the ending and clocking immediately out of the voice chat to have some ice cream and a dearly needed nap. I know it's not everyone's jam, and I made mistakes aplenty, but I was hoping at the very least for everyone to have a good time, and I had made it abundantly clear that anyone at any time can drop out or give me feedback on whatever they liked or didn't like. At the very least, this experience has made me very appreciative of my own group and how supportive they are. Alright, so first things first, guys, and kind of beating the horse dead at this point, or probably more of what is remaining of the gore that used to be a horse at this point. If you have a problem player like this, be rid of them. You will be better off mentally for it, as will the other players at your table. And please use these horror stories not as a warning and a reason as to why you should never be doing D&D, but as a lesson. Learn from these people's mistakes and learn from them, so that you don't have to deal with the same crap and you know what to look for. I'm all for giving people second chances and being nice, but you need to learn where to draw the line, tell them to stuff it, and get rid of them. D&D is entirely meant for fun. If it stops being fun for you, then you either need to deal with the reason why it's not fun anymore, or take a break yourself. So please, if you have someone like Jared, tell them to quit it, and if they don't, get rid of them. Don't keep hoping that things will get better. But, in any case, that's the end of this one. So as always, have a good one.